Welcome back to More Than a Therapy Couch, the podcast where we go beyond the walls of traditional therapy sessions. I'm your host, Allison. In a world that's constantly changing, so are the ways we navigate our mental and emotional health. We're here to embrace the notion that healing and growth extend far beyond the walls of a therapy room. Throughout this podcast, we'll be joined by a diverse array of experts and everyday individuals with compelling stories to help bring awareness to whatever you may be facing. Today, we're diving into a topic that hits home for so many of us, being around family during the holidays. From the nostalgia of our childhood memories to navigating the holidays as adults, we'll unpack common holiday stressors like cleaning, buying gifts, inviting people over, and dinner planning, with the help of Danielle Magna, a licensed therapist. So grab your emotional support water bottle, find a comfy spot, and join us as we embark on this journey. Unfiltered, no judgments, just you, me, and a couch.
As a reminder, the topics discussed are for educational purposes only and are not meant to be taken as clinical advice. If you are concerned about you or a loved one's mental health, consult a mental health professional or call SAMHSA's 24-hour hotline at 1-800-662-HELP.
Well, welcome back, everybody. I'm excited to introduce Danielle Magna, she's a licensed professional counselor and a clinical supervisor at Tree of Life Counseling Center.
Yes.
Danielle, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So for the viewers who don't know too much about you, would you be able to go into your background?
Sure. So I started out in this field working in crisis in like an emergency room. I did that while I was in grad school. And then like my first couple of jobs, I worked with adolescents in out-of-home care for different reasons. Like first it was like adolescent girls. Then I worked with the juvenile sex offender population, worked a little bit with the court system in that job. And then from there I transitioned to private practice and I've been there ever since.
Amazing. And what kind of made you want to go into mental health and becoming a therapist?
I love this question. I really do, because I feel like when I talk to like my friends who are in the field, they have a little bit of a different path and story of how they got here than I did. So I never wanted to be a therapist. I love being a therapist. Let me have that be a caveat. I love my job. But I wasn't like 15, 19, even like when I first started in college thinking like, oh, I'm definitely going to be a therapist. I actually wanted to be a writer, like a creative writer. Like I would join these like competitions and like, I was like, maybe I'll be a screenplay writer or something. So I was, started college, you take those little like gen ed classes. And I remember taking Psych 101. And it was like, I left that first class and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so interesting. Because like the pipeline is there, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, what I liked about writing was like, I like people. I'm curious about people and how they respond to, different things and how they experience life in different ways. So it was like, oh, this is like a different way to be curious about people. So whatever I went, I changed my major to psychology. I still didn't think, oh, I'm going to be a therapist. I was just like, I'm running with this. Like, I'm passionate about it. And then 4 years came and went and I was like, oh, like researching into like, where can I go from here? And like, that's when I was like, okay, like I'm a licensed professional counselor, as you said. So I was like, okay, I think like this degree aligns the most with like what I could see myself doing. And I've never looked back, but it was not the intended road.
That is so cool. I don't think I've ever heard that. I feel like I've heard people talk about like their past and stuff, but I love that because knowing you're so well spoken. That's so cool.
Yeah, I like accidentally ended up here, but I love it. I wouldn't change it for the world.
Mm-hmm. And before we kind of get into the topic of today, would you feel comfortable sharing a little bit about your personal holiday experiences, just so we can get a understanding of the family dynamics that you grew up around?
Yeah, so growing up, I feel like I had like a love-hate relationship with the holidays. So my parents got divorced when I was very young, and then one of them got remarried while I was young. So I had a lot of different households to visit for each holiday. Like, it'd be like, oh, great. Like I celebrated Christmas growing up. So it was like, oh, I'm so excited to open all my gifts. Wait, I have to like pack up my bag and go to like 6 different, which in hindsight is a great problem to have so many people to love and go to. But like as a kid, that was just like frustrating. Mm-hmm. But then again, like what I loved about the holidays growing up is I think like all my households and like my family made them really special. Like you can't replicate that like childhood magic of the holidays. Like the people who are watching don't know this, but we're filming it the week of Halloween. And I was like thinking about that this morning. And I was like, like when it was the week of Halloween, even when you were in like middle school, even a little bit in high school, it was like the energy was crazy. Mm-hmm. Like you were so excited. It felt like everything was decorated, whatever. I'm like, I'm still excited for Halloween this week, but it's like, oh, I'm working and like juggling adult response. Like you just can't get that same experience in adulthood that you can in child. Everything just feels so much more magical.
100%. Mm-hmm. That brings up such a good point in terms of looking back as an adult, and how those memories compare to holidays now. Do you find that with clients, they kind of mirror your sentiments with that?
I think a lot do, not all of them, but for sure a lot do. I noticed that the holidays in adulthood could be really complicated. I think even the adults that are really looking forward to the holidays, we have that piece balancing our adult lives, like maybe like some negative memories that come up when we're having a lot of like holidays in general, right? Like it involves a lot of family stuff. So like when that's like in your face and like the comparisons of like, oh, like people are posting this online, I think it can make things a little bit bittersweet, reflecting on like, what's my relationship with my family, comparing that to what are other people posting about the holidays. So I think it's just like a lot more stuff comes up about the holidays versus, when you're a child, it's just like, oh, I'm like focused on like what's happening this week. It's like, there's going to be pie on Thanksgiving, sick, and where it's like, we're thinking about so many other things in adulthood. Like it brings up a lot of other themes.
Absolutely. Kind of piggybacking off of that, when we were thinking about what to talk about this episode, we talked to some of our therapists. We compiled a few of the biggest holiday stressors that clients bring up. And I'd love to start kind of deep diving into each.
Sure. Let's do it.
With the first one being cleaning up your house, cleaning up and decorating. I know I definitely felt this growing up. I've seen my friends' parents felt this growing up. But why do we put so much pressure on ourselves to have a spotless house? And how can we ease that stress?
Well, I don't know if it's the same answer for everyone, but it definitely is like a common theme, right? Mm-hmm. So I think like step one is, where is that value coming for you as like an individual? Because I think, again, it's going to be varied person to person. I think one theme that comes up a lot is like, is it reflective of your external family relationships? So what I mean by that is, our homes are like an extension of ourself. It's like this safe place where we could like recluse from the world, recoup, feel safe, right? Whenever you're having people into that space, it's like a vulnerability. It's like an extension of you. It's a vulnerability. So is it reflective of just those sticky, like extended family dynamics of, oh, I have a complicated relationship with my mother-in-law, my brother-in-law, whoever, so my sister even. They're coming into my space. Are they going to ridicule it? Is it going to be compared to when my in-laws hosted Thanksgiving last year? And then it's like, so I need to make everything perfect. It has to be pristine so nobody can comment on it. It's like almost like their armor.
That's so interesting. I don't think I've ever heard anyone phrase it as, but that makes so much sense, as like a vulnerable, it's your safe space. Yeah. And you're inviting other people into your safe space, which opens you up to that criticism. So you brought up family dynamics.
Yep.
What can we do when we feel overwhelmed by family expectations, especially when it comes to hostings or gatherings, in terms of those relationships and navigating those?
Well, I think a couple of things. I think first is when I alluded to before, right, of like, what's the value that I'm placing on what these family members think of my space? Before I answer your question, to talk about is like how boundaries play a role in examining this topic, right? This is something that comes up not just around the holidays, but just in general when I'm working with clients, this need for boundaries. And I want to like share with you this little tip that this little anecdote, I guess, like I have like very long-winded anecdotal ways of like sharing because I sharing these tools with clients because I feel like that's a good way to just like remember them. And I have to preface with like this specific one I'm sharing. A different clinician many years ago shared it with me, and I've kind of expounded upon it. Not full cred there, but
if you're listening,
I don't remember who it was. It was someone at like a previous job. So like I'm willing to give credit if you're listening to this. But a lens I like to introduce first is like before we can uphold boundaries, we need to first understand like what are our boundaries? And so many people just don't even have insight around that. Like what are my boundaries that I want to uphold? Mm-hmm. And this lens I introduced to kind of like gain some clarity around that topic is my boundaries are for me. And so many people get wrapped up in this thing of, oh my gosh, like I have my boundaries and I need to do what I can to make sure you remember them, you respect them. And there's so little power in that. And like this lens, I think, is a way of leaning into that empowerment of like autonomy of adulthood of my boundaries are for me. So I'm going to tell you like what I mean by that.
Yeah, please.
So let's say that I have done the work and the reflection, and I have identified for myself that my boundary is no one will yell at me in a fight or in a conflict, like just as an example, right? So now I can share that boundary with people that are in my life. So I could say to you, Allison, listen, we're having a disagreement right now and you're yelling at me. I need you to know that that's a boundary for me. Like I don't have space for people in my life that will raise their voice in conflict with me. Mm-hmm. I could share it with you, right? Yeah. But then I need to like kind of just sit back in identifying my own rules around that boundary. So what I mean, if you were to come back and violate my boundary, let's say like a week passes and we're having a conflict and you're yelling at me, then it's my responsibility to create my rubric of like, okay, what am I going to do in these situations? I will predetermine with myself. I've already said that's a boundary for me. So I know that if that were to happen when I'm having a conflict with someone, I'm leaving the situation because I can. And that puts the power right back on me. And that takes a lot of the anxiety and the fleeingness of like, are they going to respect my boundaries? You can still feel anxious about that, right? I think that's pretty normal and human, but I don't need to get wrapped up in that power struggle of like, are you going to respect my boundaries? It's like, I hope you will. You know, if like you value our connection, I really hope you will. But if not, I could kind of like rest assured that I know what I'm going to do to keep myself safe. You yell at me or you raise your voice at me if we're having conflict again. I pause. I say, listen, I've kind of already told you that this is, you know, not something I have space for. I'm going to leave the situation and I will contact you when I feel like we could talk about this again. So using that lens for the holidays, right? Whatever it may be, whether it's, oh, I know like my aunt may make comments about how much food I'm eating or my body or whatever, right? Or will this family member respect my pronouns? Or, you know, like me and my sister fight a lot when we're in the same space and like she will curse and I like that. It's really triggering for me. It's like determining, well, what's my threshold for what I could accept in these different scenarios and what's not, and having a game plan for yourself, you know? Yeah. And this is specifically talking about adults, right? I know like kids, like they're kind of stuck in those situations, like you can't just get in the car and leave, but from the adult mindset of like, okay, I know what my boundaries are. I know what my game plan is to make sure I protect my boundaries. And so then I could kind of just sit back and see what happens with these people.
That's amazing. I don't think I've ever heard anyone talk about boundaries in terms of that control piece. You're right, because if you just share your boundaries with someone and then they violate it, it's almost like you feel even less in control than you did to begin with before you even shared that.
Yep.
So that rubric is such an interesting piece to share. And I love that that's something people can work on in therapy with a therapist, pre-plan it out. And then when they get to those situations, they feel more prepared.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important because we're seeing people during the holidays that we don't see all year, right? It's like we're in situations that maybe we're typically able to avoid on the day-to-day, but like just the very nature of like, I'm with extended family, like second cousin Sue from Alabama, wherever. And it's like, I don't always have to deal with people like this on a day-to-day. So like, let me really like tighten this up. What are my boundaries? How am I going to uphold them? What's my game plan?
And speaking of holiday specific actions and traditions. I know gift giving is a huge deal for a lot of people. So what advice do you have for individuals trying to navigate financial and emotional pressure regarding gift giving?
Well, I think one interesting place to explore with this, and I see this come up, not for everyone, right? But with some clients, it's like, I encourage them to reflect, like, where is this pressure coming from? And is it reflective of how you connect to these people or the relationship in general, right? So it's like, we have to appreciate and normalize that some people, like, if we want to talk love languages, you know, for those who love that, right? Like, some people do believe, like, how I show my love and how I connect with people, it's like in gift giving, fine. I'm not really talking about those people, but more of like, does the pressure of gift giving exploit any like cracks in the foundation of like, am I putting so much pressure on myself to buy like my parent the perfect gift because we can't sit down and feel connected in other ways?
Wow.
Or like, we can't talk about our feelings or whatever. Like, I guess, like, is there a place to reflect of like, wait, is it coming from that place? Like, am I able to show love and connection around the holidays in a different way? Like, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like that does come up with clients.
In terms of like, it's almost overcompensating for a relationship that isn't as deep as you want it to be.
By the other end of the spectrum, right? It's like, well, or is it reflective of like, I feel insecure about myself in relationships? It really doesn't have to do with the other person, how they view me, what the foundation of our connection is, but is it like, I'm just self-conscious. I have low self-esteem and like my value. And so I'm putting all of this pressure on like, I need to have the perfect gift because that's how people will see me and appreciate me. Like, what else is my contribution to being in this space around the holidays?
Wow.
So I think like both come up. And other variations too, but those are two really big themes: pressure, self-esteem, the value, right? Like, why is there a high value on the gifts? And it's okay to have, like, I think we all get excited about gifts. I think that's like completely normal, but is it like to a point where it's like overcompensating for something else?
The self-esteem piece is very interesting because I know before we even started recording, you and I were both talking about particularly when it comes to the holidays and food and making dinners and body image. So when it comes to juggling traditional family meals, dietary restrictions, and time management, how does someone strike that balance between all of that?
Food is a really big trigger around the holidays. Think about it. So all holidays, whether you're fasting, whether you're eating, doesn't matter what holiday it is, there's some type of food nostalgia associated with that. And I think also, right, as we were talking about before, you're around a lot of different people that maybe you're not around all the time who like come with their own like food stuff, right? Whether they talk about food with like diet culture type language, or they have like food aversions or whatever. So we have like, food is just could be a tricky topic for a lot of people. So you're putting people with different ideals and they're coming from different places around food and body image in the same space. And then like, how are we going to trigger each other, or how are we going to get along? So I think with striking a balance with that, I think it really depends on like where someone is at individually in their journey with body acceptance and like what their relationship to food is. Like, I know with a lot of my clients that like are in a place like where maybe they're struggling with that, their self-esteem or their body acceptance or their self-love is like not where they want it to be, and like food is still a really big trigger for them. I think we talk a lot about like, okay, so like how do we make a game plan, going back to that even discussion about boundaries, right? Like, what's your framework? What are your boundaries around this? What do you, in terms of the work you've done, what do you have capacity for? And like, what are you just not equipped to deal with right now? And so what's the action plan around this? So if someone's talking about food in a way that is like super triggering to you, like how can you remove yourself from the situation? Or I love this concept. I don't even just talk about it during the holidays, but I'm very big on priming your mind, right? So we're creating space for like the narratives and the thoughts we want to be intentional about before we step into a situation that could be triggering. With that, it's like, if you're someone who struggles with body image, self-love, all of that, so that morning, you know you're going to be stepping into a situation that has the potential to be triggering. So what are the thoughts you want to hold space for before you're even in there? Like, does that sound like I love my body. I accept it how it is. Food is fuel. Food is enjoyment. I want to be present for this, right? Mm-hmm. Priming your mind with like the type of headspace you want to approach that situation with before you're even in it.
Mm-hmm. I love that tip, particularly for adults who are navigating those conversations. Mm-hmm. When it comes to adolescents who are navigating those conversations, what advice do you have for them? Because they don't want to come off as disrespectful.
They don't. And I think and I agree. I think with adolescents, it's tricky, but I think that piece of like empowerment could still be there because maybe they can't say to their aunt, hey, that's not the way I talk about bodies or about food. Like, get out of here, right? Like, again, that like respect piece, but like, is there a way to reflect back on, okay, but I know when this conversation's happening, this is almost like a pre-prepared way that I find respectful to talk about this. Like, oh, okay, thanks. I actually like, I have to go to the bathroom or like, oh, like I want to go see like what this cousin is talking about or whatever. And then like that internal work of like coping skills, distress tolerance, whatever you've been working on individually or like with your therapist to like, how do I get myself back into that headspace after I've been triggered? So yeah, I mean, it's harder when you don't have that autonomy to just like, I'm leaving or I'm going to tell you what's what about yourself. But I think you could still put in place some of those like small empowerments of like, I could still find a way to remove myself from the situation that doesn't make these elders in my family feel disrespected.
Of course. Well, that's amazing. We will get into the rest of the episode after this break.
Today's episode is brought to you by Tree of Life Counseling Center, where people come to heal, deal, and learn to thrive. They currently have immediate availability for talk therapy and medication management with a team of over 50 licensed clinicians. Are you feeling alone? We all can use someone to talk to. Call 732-393-8391 or visit us at www.treeoflifecc.org to start your journey of self-discovery and healing today.
And we're back. So, transitioning into therapeutic advice for managing holiday stress, what are some practical steps that listeners can take when they're managing stress, setting boundaries, but also still find time to enjoy time with their family in the holidays?
So I think that's a great question. Another thing I wanted to share with you that kind of builds upon this whole boundary framework I shared earlier is I like to use this, and again, I told you I love analogies. It's like the creative writer in me surfacing in therapy, right? So I love to use this analogy of a credit card when I explain this to clients. So let's pretend you have a credit card. And sometimes things happen in life, right, where you have to be super intentional and mindful about going into debt. So for example, right, my TV broke. I don't have the finances on me to shell out $2,000. So I'm going to make the intentional choice to swipe my credit card and go $2,000 into debt, which is much different than I'm just swiping my credit card willy-nilly and accruing $2,000 of credit card debt. So bringing that back into like talking about the holidays, right? Sometimes we make the choice of, for whatever reason, it is worth it for us to get into a place of emotional debt, so to speak. So like what I mean by that is like, yeah, maybe we have the aunt that talks about food in a way that's really triggering for us, but we reflect on it. We're intentional. We weigh the pros and cons. We assess our capacity and we're like, you know what? It's worth it for me to push through that, to support myself in that because of A, B, C, D, and E. Because I don't want to miss out on the holiday with the rest of my family. Because I feel like I'm in a place where I have worked on my coping skills enough that I could handle being triggered like that or challenged in that way. And I could support myself. So like that intentional debt of like, okay, I'm about to do something that's going to be really hard for me. So then bringing it back to the credit card. So like we're mindful and intentional about that debt. So we need a mindful and intentional plan to get out of the debt. So what that looks like, right, is like, oh, I'll put $25 away from each paycheck and I will get out of the debt. I have a plan. So same thing here, right? It's like I'm going to Hanukkah, I'm going to Thanksgiving, I'm going to Christmas, whatever. And for whatever reason, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, I've decided that it's worth it for me to go. So I explore with clients, okay, what's your plan to build back after that? And that looks different for a lot of different people, right? So for some, they may say, you know what, the way I get out of that debt is I need to be really rigid with creating time to go to yoga every morning to regulate my nervous system and do something for me. And I'm like, that's great. That's step one in how we're building back that debt. For other people, it's, you know, that's going to be really tolling on me from just like an energy perspective. So I want to give myself permission to say no to any plans that arise next weekend. I don't want to feel any type of social pressure to go to something because I know that this is going to tax me. Or like whatever. Those are just like some examples. So then we work together of like, okay, how are we going to get you back to a place where like we're recouping the debt we've intentionally taken? And again, that's different than like, I'm going to keep my head down. I'm going to throw myself into all these holiday events because like I have to. Like that's swiping your credit card and not like getting into intentional debt. It's like when you've like really reflected and you're like, okay, this makes sense. I feel like another payback that like I'll kind of explore with clients is like, okay, so I'm going to Thanksgiving for ABC, whatever reason, but I give myself permission to not go to Hanukkah this year with those same people. Like, it's just about being strategic with like, what's your pay yourself back plan so you could get back to a place where you're feeling good and healthy and where you want to be.
That theme of intentionality and, control and doing things on purpose seems to keep coming up. Does that have more to do with personal autonomy and power?
Yeah, I'm really big on that. I think for a lot of people, it could be a really triggering sensation to feel like you don't have control. And I think that comes up around the holidays, right? I'm thinking back to like my own stuff, right? I don't have control of where I'm spending the holidays. I'm packing up my little bag. I'm going to like 6 different houses. I think those things come up for some people for different reasons. And it's like, so how could we make you feel like you have as much control, empowerment in these situations as possible? So that way, like you're not like just coursing with like anxiety or feel like you're just like at will to whatever's going to happen on these days.
For individuals who their intentional choice, they've weighed the pros and cons, they've spoken to a professional about it, but it was their choice to maybe cut ties with certain family members or entire blood relatives as a whole. How would one grapple with that decision, the loneliness of that, the effects that come with that?
Definitely something that comes up too, right? With those clients, sometimes I'll hear the comparisons of Thanksgiving is supposed to be a family holiday. And I've cut these people out of my life and now there's not family there to spend it with. And again, the comparison game. So I think there in those situations, it's about exploring like, yes, like you have maybe lost like that biological family for whatever reason, for intentional reasons. What are ways that you can find found family? That's like one area to explore. Like, what are your other social connections? Do you have really close friends? Do you want really close friends? Does this kind of set us on like a new path of how do we explore that? But another thing too, I explore is like, you don't need other people to make holidays special or to like do special things. So I'm totally going to butcher this word, but I talk about this a lot with clients too. Like the concept of hygie.
Oh my God, HYGGE.
I have a book on it if you would like. But basically, again, I'm piecemealing from that. Like it's the concept of romanticizing the small things in your life and not just around the holidays. I'll explore this sometimes with clients. It's like, okay, so like through the lens of the holidays, right? Like, let's say you're going to be alone this year on Hanukkah or whatever, right? So it's like, okay, what are the traditions around that holiday that you value as a person? Or what are ways that like you could make that holiday still feel special? What are your own type of rituals you want to create for yourself like that feel special? I don't know, maybe you're alone on Christmas. So it's like, that's okay. I'm going to like make myself the most awesome pasta dish and I'm going to buy myself really special Christmas PJs and pour a glass of wine and watch a movie. And like that could be special too. So it's like, how could we build different connections, not to take place of family, right, but to fulfill that part of our lives? And also like, how can you make things special just on your own without other people?
As you were talking, it reminded me of something, and I'm going to try not to tear up when I talk about it because when I first heard it, it was so special to me. But for anyone in the Princeton, New Jersey area who is familiar, and I promise this segues into my next question.
I love it. Please share.
The Bayard Rustin Center for Social Justice is open every year on Christmas Day for LGBT individuals who don't have family to celebrate the holiday with. And they bring food and they make it this really special. Like, everyone there is so approachable and so friendly. And it really becomes this like found family type of environment.
It's a great resource.
An amazing resource, which kind of transitions into my next question for listeners who identify as LGBT. What advice would you offer to help them navigate the holidays when family dynamics have that added layer of complexity to it?
Well, I think, and this is specifically talking about adults again, right? Like that caveat. But I think going back to that idea of boundaries, what's going on there that we're even examining? Is it family that's like not respecting of your pronouns in your name? Is it that you're in a relationship but you can't bring your partner around because your family is not accepting of whatever relationship you're in? What's the barrier there? What's making it complicated? Because it's not complicated in every family. In some families, it's not really like an issue. But so what's making it complicated this holiday season? And like, what are your boundaries around that? What's your capacity? Is it okay for you to be misgendered the entire Thanksgiving dinner? Are you in a place where you weigh the pros and cons and for whatever reason, that's worth it for you? That's going to look differently than like, yeah, like I have no space for that. I can't tolerate it. So I think what I'd say is like, you got to explore, what are my boundaries? Where am I at? What am I willing to create space for? And like, what is an absolute no-go for me? And then making your plan for, okay, this means I'm not going to this holiday event. If they can't do A, B, C, D, E, I'm not going to get into that power struggle of like, please respect my pronouns. Please respect my name. Please let me bring my girlfriend. I let you know that these are the things that make me feel valued and safe and would make me enjoy this day. You can't do it. So then I'm just not going to come. Yeah. Or I'm going to show up, but the second one of those things happens, I give myself permission to leave.
Particularly, and this could be a whole episode on its own, but I think this year especially might be difficult for those navigating LGBT identities during an election year. What are your thoughts surrounding respecting yourself, your identity, your autonomy, and also respecting those who might not respect you?
That's a big thing, right? I think like politics do tend to come up around the holidays. Why is that? Like, why are we talking about politics? Why are we talking about politics around the holidays? But it is something that comes up, right? And so especially when we're talking about like this subgroup of individuals, right? And how that ties into politics. I think a couple of things. Boundaries again, right? I don't need to reiterate. Obviously, we know that. What's our capacity? But I think also really having direct conversations about, hey, one, can we maybe just not talk about politics? If you're in a place where you're like, hey, we know that these conversations are not going to be productive, can we just table this and focus on the holidays and other aspects of our connection? Or can there be direct conversations about, hey, like, this is the reason I feel this way. This is how I feel like your point of view is harmful to me. Can you just hold space for that? Can you acknowledge it, right? Can we work to bridge the gap and have some, mutual understanding there? But, I think it's hard. For the most part, right, we kind of know where our families lie in terms of political points of view. You know what you're walking into. You know that you have the ability to consent to walking into it or not, right? Is this a family member that's really close to my inner circle that I want to work on bridging this gap with? Or is this someone I'm going to see once a year and I don't place a lot of value on what they think about me or about politics in general? And I'm just going to like let them say what they're going to say and like remove myself when I feel like it's something that's disrespectful or harmful to me.
I think that is all phenomenal points. It reminds me of one of the things we talked on the episode with Serby, like the art of redirection in a conversation, like spinning it back to the holidays, or someone says something rude and you're like, oh my God, have you tried the mashed potatoes? Like, it's so good this year.
Yep. Which I think is different than, again, that consenting piece of like, we're not saying like, hey, it's okay, I'm agreeing with you, or I think that this is an okay point of view to have, but it's like, okay, we're at the Thanksgiving dinner table. This is my second cousin, Billy, or whoever. Just throwing out random. I don't have a second cousin. This is like my second cousin, Billy. And, I'm going to just like let him ramble off whatever he's going to say. I'm going to say, oh, okay. And then like, I'm just going to make it a point to not be around him the rest of the evening if I find what he's sharing like super harmful. Or you could take the opposite approach. And I think if it makes you feel healed and empowered, like say what you got to say, right? Hey, I think what you just said is offensive. And this is why I personally find it offensive and why I think it's harmful. Maybe they'll be able to hear you. Maybe they won't. But if someone feels more resolved from that place of empowerment, I'd say, okay, then maybe approach it that way.
Mm-hmm. That's a huge key piece of it's not going to be a one size fits all.
No.
Like I know I love a good confrontation. If someone says something, I will force them to explain it further until they talk themselves into a loop.
Yep.
But you're right in terms of that's not right for everyone. And sometimes just kind of letting it brush off and bringing back that piece of emotional debt, trying to refill yourself with those supportive friends, family after the fact is the best thing that someone can do.
Because not everybody's there. We're talking about so many different things that make the holidays complicated. So is there even like a hierarchy here? I want to feel good about my body image. I want to navigate not being ridiculed by my mother-in-law. I want to like make sure my house feels presentable for me. So then is it like debating with someone I see once a year about why what they're saying is super harmful and hurtful? Worth it? Do I have the capacity for that? Do I want to get into that intentional debt? You can. There's nothing wrong with that. But with everything going on, not everyone has that capacity.
Yeah. We will be back after one more commercial break. This episode is brought to you by Confections of a Rockstar Bake Shop and Catering. Are you looking for a sweet treat or custom cake and desserts for your next event? Stop into their Asbury Park location where everything is made from scratch using high-quality ingredients. Custom orders can be placed online at www.confectionsofarockstar.com or by calling 732-455-3510 today. And we are back. So Danielle, I'm going to ask you the question that we ask all of our guests, which is if you were stuck on an island, what is one book that you would bring with you?
So I think I will say is I would just bring a blank notebook and write that book I never got to write because I became a therapist.
That's a beautiful
I
answer.
would lean into my creativity and write a novel.
Oh,
Yeah.
I love that. For viewers, as we're wrapping up the episode, I just wanted to reflect a little bit on some of the things that we talked about in terms of nostalgia, navigating the holidays as an adult. Any other final thoughts on the differences between the two?
I think my final thoughts would be whatever's coming up for you around the holidays, whether it's like the nostalgia of childhood, maybe you don't have fond memories of childhood around the holidays and they're coming up for you in the here and now, just like be compassionate with yourself. Be kind to yourself, be flexible with yourself, meet yourself where you're at. Try to deconstruct any pressures or expectations you're putting on yourself. And the holidays are hard. Cut yourself some slack.
And speaking of the holidays being hard, tune into next episode. For now, thank you so much, Danielle, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We appreciate your insight. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Remember, the holidays can be a roller coaster, but you're not alone. If you enjoyed this episode, definitely be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. And we will see you next time on the More Than a Therapy Couch podcast. Bye. No, you got it on as it was.
Oh, it's jazzy.